So we also conduct, oh, there we go. We also conduct trainings just like this one, but we can do so at businesses, law enforcement agencies, communities, virtual and in person, whatever people need. So another thing to keep in mind. So what we're going to go over today is, I think it's important as you guys are meeting with your clients and you're trying to provide support out there in the community, to just have an idea of what the whole fraud landscape kind of looks like and understand what kind of trends we're seeing. And in general, just be aware of what can and does happen. And so that you know kind of the signs to identify that. And it just kind of is a good way to start the conversation because you at least have a fundamental understanding of what exactly people are falling risk to via online social media, via phone scams, via whatever. So we'll go through some of that. We'll talk a little bit about kind of data breaches and cyber attacks, and not in any huge extent, but just so you kind of understand how that fits into the whole landscape. We'll talk through some common scams and identity-related attacks, and then we'll go over some general tips to protect your identity. So this is great for you personally, for your families, as well as for your clients. So again, it's just kind of some basic things that we want to make sure that you walk away today with a good understanding of. So to just define what we're talking about when we talk about identity theft and fraud, a lot of that involves your personal identifiable information. So PII for short, you've probably heard this term a lot. If you have any sort of security training for your jobs, that there's PII comes up a lot as far as keeping that on your computer and all the security involved. But the context here that we want to talk about is as far as what's being stolen, what kind of information about you are people looking for on the internet. So your credentials are things that are unique only to you. So you're the only one who should be using your social security number, your birth certificate, your driver's license number in your particular state. These are all things that are unique to you. And of course, they're going to be valuable to identity thieves who are looking to maybe serve as an imposter for your credentials, or even just, opening new financial accounts in your name, things like that. You need something like this, some sort of credential in order to do that. Also, though, there's attributes, which are things that are unique to you, but also other people share them. So you're probably not the only one with your name. You're not the only one who's ever lived at your address, things like that. But what these are pieces of a puzzle. And the more pieces of the puzzle that come together, the more complete picture of your identity is formed. So it's not just the credentials and your social security number that you need to be worried about. It's a lot of other things as well, some of which would be considered your personal attributes. But on top of that, there's additional information that's also valuable to people that are committing fraud. So your behaviors online, so your social media, your browsing activity, spending habits, where you're shopping, sharing your location on certain apps, things like that are all extremely valuable to people that are committing fraud, mainly because it's not just the applying for a new credit card or the applying for a new loan in your name. It's the authentication piece. They have to be able to authenticate their identity, or your identity, I should say. And to do that, there's things like security questions. There's guessing your passwords based on different things that you like. There's all that kind of stuff. So your behaviors are just as important as your credentials. Also biometric, so your facial image, your photo, your voice print. That's something that we've seen a lot popping up when it comes to fraud, is just the sound of your voice, because as you know, a lot of times you will call into your bank or whatever, and you have to speak and take it through the different prompts, and that voice print can be really valuable. So things like that, all of those things are pieces of a puzzle that can come together to help someone to have a more complete picture of your identity, and to also be able to kind of take that and do account takeovers and things of that nature. So all of these things are just as important, and you have to safeguard them in the same kind of way. So we've asked consumers, we actually do an annual data breach report from ITRC, And one of the things that we look at is what kind of data is actually being protected by consumers. What are the things you think are at most at risk? And generally, social security number is what people feel like is the biggest risk factor. As long as they keep that private, everything else is kind of out there and it's okay. So that's the biggest thing that they'll protect. That and a credit card number are the biggest ones. But really what we're seeing when you look online in some of these online marketplaces on the dark web and things like that, where people sell identity data, um, the photos are really important. Driver's license pictures, you can see that the selfie holding an ID is how people can authenticate themselves when they're trying to log into certain systems and get access to certain data. So that is just even way more valuable at this point than social security numbers. There have been so many data breaches and there's been so much information and data out there for years and years now. It's something we used to say at LexisNexis all the time is your identity has already been stolen. So what is it that you're going to do to protect that identity from being used in fraudulent ways? So keeping this kind of stuff locked down is just as important again as that social security number. Some of you might notice the utility bill template as being something that's pretty valuable as well. So for the utility bill, the reason that pops up as being valuable is you might know if you go in to get a new driver's license, they need to verify your residence, and a lot of them will verify your residence through a utility bill. If you have a fraudulent utility bill, it's a lot more easy to get a fraudulent driver's license. So you kind of look at those stages of authentication and proof of identity, and that falls in as something that's valuable for people that are committing fraud to have. So when we talk about types of identity fraud, it's not just the financial stuff, right? It's not just somebody opening a loan in your name or a new credit card or even logging into your bank account or anything like that. There's also medical identity fraud, which is someone using someone else's health insurance information to get health care. And then criminal identity fraud, using someone else's information or driver's license or whatever in the commission of a crime or getting arrested with that information. Those two things are extremely difficult to clear up and can take a long time to work through. We don't see them as often as the financial identity fraud, but they do still happen with regularity. And then there's the government identity fraud. Government identity fraud would be people using your information to file a fake tax return or also to file for unemployment insurance. So we've seen those two things quite a bit, especially with the COVID pandemic. And I'll talk a little bit more about those, but it's good to be aware that falling victim to one can make you more susceptible to others. So identifying that fraud early and taking steps to mitigate the damage can be really important and kind of keep people out of being mired for years and trying to clear up these different aspects of their identity. So, I mean, ideally what we want you to do is understand how to prevent these things from happening in the first place, but also how to mitigate that damage early so that there's not this recurring amount of fraud happening for the same individuals. One of the reasons that we know about what fraud looks like as far as how people are made vulnerable and then how long it takes them to clear it up, things like that. We do every year a consumer aftermath report. We also do a business aftermath report, and this is an annual thing we put out to kind of give a little bit more of a humanizing aspect to identity theft and fraud. We actually ask people for their personal stories. We, of course, have different survey questions and things like that we look at, but we also look back at our people that are calling into our hotline and what kind of problems are they having and what kind of experiences are they going through, and then we compile that into our aftermath report. So it's a great thing to kind of just know that it's out there so that you can stay on top of the latest trends and what's going on for your clients as well. So just a few of the things that we have learned from the from the aftermath report from this year, that people are continuing to lose significant amounts of money when it comes to identity fraud. It's a massively underreported problem, and the dollar amounts are underreported. Mostly because people don't know how or whom to report this to, and then also there's some embarrassment involved. There's some shame involved in falling for different schemes. and giving up a lot of money for some long shot thing that they thought might pay off in the end, or falling for, romance scams, things like that. There's a lot of shame involved. And, there doesn't need to be, because this happens all the time to so many people every day. But we really see that that people are kind of hesitant to talk about it a lot of times. So you might, experience that with people that you're working with and working for, that they might not be willing to kind of own up to what happened. But the more they're willing to share, the easier you can mitigate any further damages. Also, we see a large number of repeat victims of identity theft and fraud. So once your information is out there, and once you've fallen for one thing, you're kind of seen as an easier target. And we see this in all types of crime, right? But it's the same thing with identity theft. I know personally someone who had fallen for something, one of those scams where someone deposits money into your account and then you wire them part of that money. After that time of that happening, that person was getting nonstop calls from different scammers that were just trying to get through and trying to get him to send more money. He had to change his phone number. It got to be extremely stressful because he was just constantly being attempts at more victimization. So again, that's why it's important to work on prevention and mitigation earlier in the process if you can. We asked identity theft victims how they discovered they were victims of identity crime. A lot of people noticed fraudulent charges on their account and checked their credit report. That's how they kind of noticed that these things were happening. Or also receiving a bill that they didn't owe is another way that they discovered that they were victims of identity fraud. And then also how long it took them to resolve that. Sometimes it only takes a day or so. Sometimes it can take years, especially when it comes to the government-based identity fraud. So again, what we're really trying to get people to understand is how to prevent these things from happening in the first place, and how to catch all of this stuff early so that it doesn't continue to happen and doesn't continue to build on itself. So the top 5 changes that people say that they made after falling victim to identity theft are checking their credit reports regularly, deleting scam emails and text messages without answering them, using numbers and letters, using strong passwords. Essentially, the recommendation now is 12 characters or more, and then not putting personal information on their social media profiles, and then having some sort of a security or credit freeze on their credit reports. So I'm going to talk through all of these things and why they're important and how to actually do take care of all these things. But these are the kinds of things to kind of take away as the top things that you can do to prevent additional identity theft from happening to yourself or your clients. So some common types of fraud and scams that we're seeing, I mentioned this already, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. Unemployment identity theft is huge right now and it has been for years, but it has picked up exponentially. And the main reason for that is there's a lot of state governments who are willing to let some fraud out the door in order to get money to people who need it. So if you're unemployed and you are struggling to pay your bills, they want to be able to provide that assistance. They've got money at the state level to do so. And no matter how much authentication you put in place, there's still going to be some fraud that goes out the door. What we are seeing, though, that are some states that aren't really doing anything or doing very bare minimum authentication and identity verification at the beginning of that application process, and they're letting a lot of money go out the door to fraudsters. People will only find out about this. You would only find out that someone used your identity to apply for unemployment in another state if you get something in the mail. You get an email maybe, or a physical mail that asks you to verify that you applied for this, or confirming your application process, things like that. If people aren't paying attention to that, or maybe they think that the verification letter in itself is a scam, that's something that we see a lot. You see something come in from the state of Nebraska, let's say, saying we want to confirm that you applied for unemployment benefits. People might see that and think it's a phishing email and really aren't sure what to do, maybe just delete it or report it as spam. And in that situation, what they're really trying to do is authenticate that application through that mail. So it's kind of this, it's the slippery slope, right? Because we do see those email phishing attempts a lot, but we also see state governments trying to authenticate unemployment benefits through that same method. So it's just something to kind of be aware of, to pay attention to these kinds of things, but also, knowing the difference between a legit email or letter and something fake. And we'll talk about those things here in a minute, but this is something that's happening quite a bit, and it really can cause a lot of really immediate and long-term damage. Tax identity theft is someone filing a fraudulent return with your identity information. This was huge about 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago. So much money was being sent out by state governments, tax refunds to people that did not deserve those refunds. We were seeing a lot of synthetic identities that were applying for refunds. This happens a lot, especially when it comes to people who don't have a big credit history. So maybe they're underbanked, or people that are just coming into the world of having credit files, like 18, 19-year-olds that are getting their first jobs, things like that. We see those identities getting stolen and invented pretty often. And this is the same thing you want to keep in mind, is that states will try to authenticate that information with physical letters in the mail, and then also emails verifying that your tax return was filed. So the best thing that you can do to prevent this from happening is filing early in the season. It gives people less of a chance to file with your information. So filing your tax refund or the tax return early in the process, using tax preparers that are legitimate. A lot of people like to use someone they know in their neighborhood, or maybe something that's low cost or free because they don't have much money to begin with. And that can lead to preparer fraud, which is a whole other issue that we see out there quite a bit, with the same tax preparers filing multiple fraudulent applications or changing little details on the tax return in order to get money themselves that does not end up going to the actual consumer. And then also just, keeping physical documents secure. This is still a good way to prevent identity theft and fraud as well. So these things of just kind of going through the proper channels to file your tax return can help to prevent that fraud as well. The other types of scams that we're seeing, and the good news that we're going to talk about is the prevention of all of these things is the same, right? It's just kind of being aware of your data, where it's located, how it's secured, and kind of not falling for some of these scams that are coming in. But what we generally see when it comes to non-government related scams is confusion and urgency generated by the people that are committing the fraud. So romance scams are a really sad reality that continues to happen. And this is nothing new. It's just the channels are different, right? Now we're seeing it more through social media than ever before. But I mean, this was happening back in the mail order catalog days of those romance scams. But we're just seeing it on an unprecedented scale at this point. But confusion and urgency are those feelings that they try to generate with people that are falling victims to this type of fraud. Same thing for phone scams, social media takeovers, and any sort of prize, lottery, grant money, anything that tells you you're going to get money now, just to complete some simple task, or to we need to deposit this into your account, and then you just mail us a check. Things like that are generated, designed to create confusion and urgency. So just those two things, though, in themselves can be good warning signs and things you can tell your clients that if they're receiving emails or calls or social media messages that generate these types of feelings, they are most likely, or pretty much always, fraudulent. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. They prey on those two emotions that you'll see a lot, especially with senior citizens, unfortunately. Senior citizens fall victim to identity theft and fraud more often than other groups. It is a source of a massive amount of stress and frustration and embarrassment from senior citizens. So it's something to really keep in mind, that they are perpetually targeted for this kind of thing, especially romance scams. And anything that involves any online sophistication, that they're not just going to suddenly, you're 85 years old and you're not just going to learn how to master the internet or social media. So they need help with these things. And you have to understand that they're just constantly being targeted for this kind of stuff. If you have people in your community or your clients who are falling victims of identity theft and they have elderly people in their families, it's important for that lesson and that prevention messaging to get to the whole family, not just to that one individual person. And giving them those resources is really important. So how to protect yourself and others. So these are kind of the main things we'll go through as far as protection. One is upgrading your passwords, which is, I know, kind of something simple that we talk about all the time, but it continues to be the best way to prevent identity fraud from occurring. Spotting phishing attempts, which are fraudulent emails or text messages that are coming in, trying to get you to click on something or open an attachment, things like that. Device protection, so your actual physical device like your phone or your laptop or your tablet, protecting those and using multi-factor authentication. Social media safety, we'll talk through some fundamentals there. And then your credit report and how to, the importance of reviewing and freezing that credit report. These things in themselves are the simplest steps that people can take to protect themselves. So upgrading your password, it's interesting. There's some companies that are coming out now that are kind of trying to drive the elimination of passwords and using your device itself to authenticate you and just getting rid of passwords altogether. So we're starting to see that trend. I'm personally all for it because we all hate to have to remember our passwords. None of us feel safe securing those passwords anywhere. And the worst thing you can do is reusing the same simple passwords over and over in all your different systems. I've got my mom, for example, I'll go to log into her email or something to get something out of it for legitimate reasons. And I can pretty much guess what her password is because she refuses to change it. So those types of things, because they're easy to remember, maybe your sibling's name and their birth date. These are really easy to guess, especially if you're using them in multiple ways. You're using it for your bank and your Facebook account or whatever it is. So the best practice is to have one password for an account for each account. Using a password manager is fine. Those things are secure as long as you're using a legitimate password manager, and your password to your password manager is not easy to recognize. So for example, I store my passwords. I've got a Google account like a lot of us do, my Gmail account. There's a Google password manager that they will save your passwords for you. It is easy to do. Just kind of hope that they don't get hacked, I guess. But you have to keep my Google password to get to that password manager has to be as strong as possible. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's okay to use those managers, but you want to make sure that those are as secure as possible. If you're not going to use a password manager, it's good to pick a song lyric or a quote that you might know that someone else might not. And then 12 characters or more make it harder to crack. There's actually bots and software out there that's designed to crack passwords. And you might think, well, there's nothing of value on my computer, or I don't have any money in my bank account. Why would they need that? There are ways to take advantage of your identity, regardless of what kind of assets you have. So it's important to make sure that you're abiding by these different rules for your passwords to just have that kind of bare minimum protection for yourself and your family. Phishing and social engineering. So this is the #1 way that that cyber attacks and data breaches happen is through phishing and social engineering. There's something called business email compromise, which is really just another form of social engineering. And that's a huge thing right now, business email compromise, which is they're not necessarily going after individual consumers as much. They're going after entire businesses, including their employees and their finances and all the data that that business maintains on their customers. So these are big things right now, but we still see constantly, I'm sure you all see this all the time, these phishing emails that come into your email account. Even if you filter them out, we still tend to get them. So this is still a very prominent thing. And it can be, you can even get them on social media sometimes. You get phishing ads or pop-ups or things like that that are designed to get you to click on a link. And that's the whole point of it, is to get you to click on that link. And they're able to then gather information about your Wi-Fi network, your computer. They're maybe impersonating a legitimate website to get you to log in using your user ID and password. There's all sorts of reasons for this. But thankfully, the way to detect these things and the way to avoid those scams is the same, regardless of what they're trying to get you to do. So the thing that you'll notice more than anything else is the email address that the phishing emails comes from. So you can see this one on the screen. This is allegedly from Microsoft, but you can see the return address on that is not legitimate. And then you can see that there's some kind of weird wording. The logo looks a little off. And you're getting this email to tell you that your email or your account will be deactivated. I get these all the time. In fact, I get emails from our CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center telling me things like this all the time. So it's all fake information, right? So they're trying to get you to click on that Keep My Account Active button, which is something you don't want to do. What you should always do when you get emails like this, whether it's from Microsoft, Amazon, whatever, is just go right to the source. Don't click on anything. Go separately to your Microsoft account, your Amazon account, your bank account, log in with those credentials that you have, and then just see if you see anything there that looks suspicious. That's the best way to do it, is to just go right to the source. You can even call them, call customer service and make sure, but this is never the only way that anyone will try to reach you. And it's important, if you see anything that looks remotely suspicious, to not click on those links. It's really important to get that messaging out to everyone. There's some other examples of phishing emails that we see a lot from Amazon, because a lot of people are using Amazon, of course. You can see the return address on those. None of them are legitimate Amazon.com email addresses. You can also, again, see some strange attachments, misspellings. This is especially hard to detect for people who have English as a second language. They might not pick up on those nuanced little small grammatical errors and things like that, and misspellings. So these are things that these are things that you'll notice in these types of spammy emails. So again, they're just trying to get you to open an attachment, click on the link, which will then enable them to get information about you and your computer. And it can also download what we call ransomware. Ransomware is essentially a bug that will be downloaded onto your phone or your laptop or your tablet. And what it's intended to do is to make you pay money in order to get back into your device. So we've seen this a huge trend in that direction. And a lot of people pay it because they don't know what else to do. So the best thing is to not set yourself up for that to begin with by not clicking on these links. Device protection. So with your password manager being kept on your phone, a lot of people are seeing that your phone itself is the biggest way that they're able to authenticate through multi-factor authentication and things like that. Keeping an eye on your phone and making sure that your phone itself is with you at all times. That's the best way to kind of secure everything that's in it. So having a PIN or a biometric lock on your device, meaning if you go to the coffee shop, they call your name, you go up to the counter to pick up your coffee, and you leave your phone sitting on the table, that nobody can pick that up and then get right into your phone and see all of your information. So it seems simple, but that's really, really important to keep that secure. Having some sort of Find My Phone feature or software that's built into Apple devices. For Android devices, you actually have to download an app from the App Store for that to be able to find your phone. And then another really good thing you can do is applying software updates as frequently as possible. When you see those updates come up on your phone, that there's a software update, a lot of times it'll do it overnight. Don't dismiss those. You have to keep that updated, because your actual operating system for Apple and Android, Microsoft on your laptop, anything like that, those operating systems, they are constantly patching up their security holes. So if you keep up to date on your security updates, on your software updates, you're automatically going to be patching those holes through those updates. You don't necessarily need additional antivirus software or anything else you need to pay for. If you're keeping those that your general operating software up to date, that's a really good way to secure your device and your information. Another thing just to mention while we're on this topic is notifications. For convenience purposes, sometimes you can see your notifications that'll come up on your phone screen, even if your phone is locked. So things will come up from your bank, you'll see full text messages. Sometimes people have it set up so you can see the full message or the full email right there on your locked screen. That's really not a good practice to have. You know, it's also distracting in general, right? But to have that pop up on your lock screen just means other people have access to that information all the more easily. So just keeping that device locked down as much as possible is the best thing that you can do. On that same topic, multi-factor authentication is really smart to have on not only just your phone, but all of your anything you would use to reset a password. For example, if I go to reset my Google password, I get an authentication message that comes through as a text message on my phone. I also get it to an alternate non-Google email. I get a notification that that someone's trying to update my password. So those types of things that you want to keep in place so that there's not just one source that someone can go to in order to get into your account. Typically there are, you can do this with your social media account, set up multi-factor authentication right there within your privacy settings, so that if someone tries to log into Facebook, for example, from a device that they've never logged into before, and they're using your information, you'll get that notification through your phone or through your email or whatever. It's a really good thing to have in place. I will caution you that if you have a multi-factor authentication in place and you forget your password, that's a whole pain in the butt that you have to endure to try to get back into your account. So it's really important to kind of look at these things holistically, keeping good track of your very strong passwords and having multi-factor authentication is the way to keep everything as safe as possible. There's also authentication apps in the app stores for Apple and Android that are legitimate. You'll see they've got, you know, the most downloads, good reviews, they're certified, all that kind of thing. Authentication apps can be really useful as well in kind of in place of that multi-factor authentication as well. One thing to keep in mind that security questions are not necessarily enough. The multi-factor authentication is really the way to go. Scammers, once they get into your account, one of the first things that they'll do is change your security questions and change your answers. And that way, if you're trying to log back into your account, you can't get in because now those answers are different. So we see that a lot. We see people calling into the call center with that problem all the time. So it's really important to make sure that you're using that multi-factor authentication on top of your strong passwords. Phone scams are still a thing, right? So we get those all the time. Even if you're on the do not call list, we see those things coming in a lot. And really, it's the same caution as email. You're getting something that seems to be from a legitimate business or government entity. The best thing you can do is go right to the source. So unless you initiated that contact, it's better to just hang up the phone, delete the email, etc., and go right to the source. So if you get a call from the IRS and they're telling you that you owe money and you are going to be prosecuted if you don't pay this money through a gift card that you buy at the drugstore, these things are, you know, they're banking on the fact that they can call, you know, 100,000 people that day and 3 people will fall for it, you know, so these things are going to keep coming in. But the best thing you can do if you're nervous about, do I owe the IRS money? Is this a legit thing? Is to go right to irs.gov, call your local IRS office, and they will be able to tell you if you actually owe money or if there's any problem with your account. Anything that has to do with depositing unsolicited checks, this is a really big thing for people who are really hurting for money to begin with, right? You already are having financial trouble. You get an unsolicited check, or you get someone asking you to deposit a check and then wire them that money for whatever number of reasons. This is always going to be something that turns out to be financially devastating to you. There's no situation in which you will actually walk away from this with more money than you started with. So there's no scenario, short-term or long-term, in which this is a good idea. Buying gift cards, someone asking you to buy prepaid gift cards, things like that. Again, these are all things that are never going to end up beneficial, and they can be really tempting if you're in a tough financial bind to begin with. So it's really important to convey that to clients that is something that they are particularly at risk for if they are already having financial difficulty. So always going right to the source and always keeping in mind that a scam is a scam, and you're never going to come out on top when it comes to this kind of stuff. So the prepaid gift cards are a huge thing in the fraud community. But your virtual wallet is actually really secure. It's the safest thing other than cash to use. So if you have a digital wallet like Apple Pay or Google Pay on your phone, these things are very secure. It took me a long time to accept that. I just generally distrust anything on my phone. But these are the virtual payment cards, and then having your own personal credit cards or debit cards or whatever in your phone is actually really a secure way to do business. So you can create virtual payment cards that are one-time use only. Those are a good replacement for those physical gift cards that are again ripe with fraud. So and you can see how this goes hand in hand with device protection, strong passwords, et cetera, because you're keeping everything on your phone, but you're keeping your phone secure. So so it's all kind of a layered approach to that security. Social media. So we have a whole class dedicated, a whole presentation dedicated just to social media safety, because people still don't realize that anything you post on social media can be used against you when it comes to answering your security questions, creating fake accounts in your name, people doing social engineering to try to connect with you based on shared interests that they know you share because you post everything publicly on social media. So these things are important to lock down. I've had these conversations many times where people are like, well, what you know, why would anyone want to steal my identity? That I don't have anything, or you know, who cares when I'm just because I posted this really good recipe. I really want everyone to know how good it is, and I want to put it out there. There's just no reason to share anything publicly on social media unless you are maybe a business who's trying to, you know, drum up business that way. Maybe you have a small business, you're trying to sell things, or you're trying to promote yourself. These are, you know, obviously social media is a great way to do that. But you as a person, especially elderly people that are putting everything out there with a public setting, are just setting themselves up for potential fraud. So social media, the biggest thing to keep in mind and to convey to others is that they're just advertising platforms. They exist to be advertising platforms. That is how they make their money. So they're not there as a public good. It's not there to help you share information with others and to reconnect with your high school friends and all of that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, it's great for that. And it's great for getting to know people who share interests, but you have to keep in mind that they are just giant advertising platforms. They are not your safety is important, but not as important as revenue. So keeping all of your accounts private and changing those default settings, those default privacy settings, is really important. Anytime you have a new social media account, or just going in to do a checkup on your accounts here and there, is really smart, because sometimes they'll go in and add new ways for people to access your data, and you want to make sure that everything is locked down. Everything should be set to private. This goes especially for people who have maybe their kids have social media accounts on Snapchat, TikTok, etc. Those things are by default set to be publicly shared. So you have to make sure that those settings are set down to private accounts, or share with my friends only. Things like that are really important. You can also lock down who can message you. That's a big way that people get access to information, is by sending friend requests and messages that maybe have some aspect of social engineering involved. So people think, oh, what the heck, I'll just accept this and talk to this person. What's the harm? And the harm is that is maybe not even a real human being. It's just a bot trying to get access to your accounts. So just keeping in mind that all of that stuff has to get locked down. Verifying any friend requests or message requests before accepting those. Facebook actually has a really good feature now called Privacy Checkup, where you can go in and it'll take you through each aspect of privacy within that Facebook account. So this is something that's relatively new, I think. It's helpful, but it's also good to take those same principles into all other aspects of social media, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc., but also other websites that you don't think of as social media, but they are. Things like Pinterest, even music apps like Spotify, what's the LinkedIn, the professional social networking. It's a professional website. So you think, well, this is all, a bunch of professionals on here. No one's going to, I want to put myself out there in case I'm looking for a job, et cetera. But it's just another social media site. So you have to take those that same mindset into those types of settings as well, and making sure that you've got strong passwords, that you're not using the same, using Facebook to log into all these other applications. Just essentially gives them permission to share your information back and forth. So it's just good to keep in mind that these things exist not for your betterment or safety. They exist to be money, revenue generating advertising platforms. Same goes for online shopping. So we all know when we go in and maybe you'll Google something you're looking for. I was looking for some new shoes the other day, and I went in and ran a search for the shoes that I'm looking for. The first links that usually pop up when you run a search on something are ads. They are there at the top because they pay to be at the top. Those links pay Google to be at the top of your search results when you look for certain things. It doesn't mean that they're legitimate websites. A lot of times they're not. Another big one that I've seen is ticket purchases for sporting events, concerts, etc. You go to search for an event that you want to go to, and the top links that come back are their advertising websites to reseller sites for those tickets. It's not straight to the source. So instead of going to Ticketmaster or some other website that's selling Eventbrite, things like that, it's some reseller website that is selling that, is trying to get you to go to that website, enter the information. So you're entering your data and your credit card number and all of that into this website, and you're probably also paying more for the tickets than they're worth. So you always want to kind of go to those trusted retailers and keep in mind that, if I'm going to buy tickets, I'll just go to Ticketmaster.com, and that's probably where they are, instead of running that Google search and clicking on the first thing that comes up. Same goes for any type of clothing purchases. Really just any online retailers. Just kind of do your homework, make sure that they're legit, and just try to use the same ones as much as possible if you can, so that you're not falling victim to any scams that way and entering your data into a website that's not legitimate. And then your credit report. So this is something I mentioned at the beginning, is a good way to know when if and when maybe fraud is beginning to occur or has occurred as it pertains to your identity. Annualcreditreport.com is a legitimate website. I know I wish they'd pick something that sounded more legitimate, but it's actually the government mandates through consumer protection that you have access to your credit report for free at least once per year. With the COVID pandemic, they've actually allowed people, I think you can go in once a month now and check your credit report. And so you go in, you enter your information, you get your credit report from the different credit bureaus, and then you can review what's on there. And the whole point of doing this is to make sure, because if someone else, let's say, applied for a loan with your name and your credentials and your information, you would see it on your credit report because it's tied to your social security number and your name. So going into that credit report and you're looking through to make sure that everything on there is something that you recognize to be yours, that's where you can detect that fraud. So you also want to make sure that your name, date of birth, all of that looks right. A lot of times fraudsters will take your information and change one detail in order to kind of fool the authentication processes that are in place. So if you see a date of birth in there that you maybe haven't used, you suddenly see a junior, senior, or something like that on your account, or a misspelling, or maybe a last name you've not used before. Those are things to kind of keep an eye on as well to make sure that there's not any fraud happening. What those things are called are trade lines. So you have your information like your name, DOB, social security number, addresses, all of that, and then you've got your trade lines, which are any entity that you've done business with, borrowed money from, credit cards, things like that. So just reviewing those, it's pretty easy to do if you know what you're looking for, and it's really smart thing to lock all of that down. You really, if you want to freeze your credit report, what that means is that no new requests for any type of credit can come in without you getting notified. So it's essentially, if there's a new credit card application that gets filed with your information, they're not able to do that because your credit is frozen. If you are applying for a new credit card and your credit is frozen, you can thaw it for 24 hours or a week or whatever it takes for you to get that transaction through. but it's a really good practice to just keep it frozen until you have to get to that point. So there's 3 primary consumer reporting agencies: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. There are actually hundreds of consumer reporting agencies, but those are the only 3 that anyone really needs to be concerned with when it comes to freezing or locking your credit report. There's also commercial products out there designed to lock your report, generate alerts when new things come into your credit report. Those are fine. They just cost money versus a credit report, which is mandated by the federal government to be free. Versus freezing your credit, which is mandated by the federal government to be free. So freezing is always free, and the locks and the alerts, sometimes they cost money, but they generally do a lot of the same things. But the point of them, again, is to make sure that there's not new things coming into your credit that you don't detect until much later. And by that point, it's spun out of control and it's going to take you years to get a handle on it. So that's why we tell people to freeze their credit report. So reviewing and freezing your credit and just kind of building those lifelong habits of keeping your digital identity and your overall identity information locked down. And keeping an eye on that. Fraud is not going anywhere anytime soon. This is not a trend that's going to go away, unfortunately, as far as we're aware. It's too lucrative. People make millions and billions of dollars off of fraudulent transactions every year. So just making sure that you're developing these lifelong habits, and again, conveying that to your clients to build these habits. It's not just, oh, I had a problem and now I solved it. It's making sure that these things are kind of built into the way that you do business. This is also a really good way to get your credit score and get your credit built up to a good place so that you're not having all these financial difficulties to begin with, and you're not falling prey to identity theft in such a way that, not you're being targeted because of your low credit or bad credit or poor financial situation. And then just asking for help. Again, the ITRC is here to help people. If you've got a client, or if you yourself are experiencing any sort of issue and you just want to talk through it and talk through your options, get resources, you can always reach out to us. We also have a help center on our website where you can actually go in and select what you're having an issue with and what's happening with it. So these are 2 drop downs that are on our website. You can see here, I had gone in just as a test, as an example, and selected my driver's license is being used by a thief. So you can just select certain things within those drop downs. So you may have my, my bank account has been taken over by someone I don't know. These are other things that you can kind of keep in mind. And then clicking on that will actually let you filter it down by the type of information you're looking for. And then you can go in and get those help items from there. So we have tons of resources available on our website that you can point people to and that you can use as well. But again, you can always just call us and we can point you to that direction as well. Okay, I'm not sure what time it is. Oh yeah, we're almost out of time. I see that there is one thing in the chat. Oh yeah, the presentation's being recorded. Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can drop it into the chat, and I'd be happy to take those questions now as I take a sip of my coffee.
Thanks, Samantha. I have a question. So we, back when I used to take calls at the front, we used to get a lot of calls from people who said that they were the victim of identity theft. If we refer them to your office, what kind of services can they expect? Do you provide direct service? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we would not be the ones to actually clear it up for you, meaning we're not going to call your bank or call the IRS or actually, reach out to the credit reporting agencies, consumer reporting agencies. What we do is give you the tools and empower people to make those decisions and to take those steps for themselves, and maybe giving you the knowledge and understanding of how to do that. And even down to what specific numbers to call. Any way we can help, but we would not be the ones who are actually resolving your credit or doing that. And that's a good question, because I know that a lot of people with, especially if you have bad credit, you're trying to clear it up. There are a lot of people out there that are marketing their services to do that for you, but they're actually just causing you more problems by creating shadow identities with your social security number and things like that. Those, again, are never going to turn out in your favor necessarily. So it's good to be vigilant of those things. But at the same time, we're not the ones that offer those specific direct services.
Thank you.
Mhm. Do we have any other questions?
Hi, sorry, I have a question. Sorry, let me turn my video on. Is that it? So sorry about that. So I would certainly err on the side of caution, but I get a lot of calls from people who don't necessarily have internet access to check their annual credit report, and they it comes up because they're calling me about a mortgage, or all of a sudden their bank account is empty, and that leads to the situation that they're calling us on with housing issues. So I mean, I would, in that case, I would just direct them to the 800 number to you, but is there anything, any other kind of suspicious kind of things like that come across where somebody should suspect identity theft, or other than the bank account is empty?
Yeah, well, gosh. One of the things that we typically, well, first of all, the credit report not having online access, there's a number of, you can go, libraries can provide this access. There's other governmental resources where if you don't have, even through some state consumer agencies, if I'm sure Pennsylvania has some sort of a consumer protection agency, they can provide those services as well. So it doesn't have to be, you personally logging in and getting your credit reports. So those services are available. And then as far as, the bank account being empty, there's not, the only other way to really know that something is happening is, again, with the credit freezes, locks, and alerts to know that something's happening. The other thing we caution people not to do is not to use your debit card number for anything. So I know people can't necessarily get credit cards if you've got, not great credit, or you don't want to open a credit card that has insanely high interest. But there are those one-time numbers that you can use, those virtual cards, or things like that, to try to keep that from happening. The other thing is, within your bank, if you've got your debit account and then you've got a savings account that can't access, something like that, to keep your bank account from being drained. We tell people a lot not to use your debit card for even just routine purchases. If you have an alternate number or credit card number, it's much easier to clear that up than, of course, it is to replace the money that's in your bank account and argue with your bank about whether or not something is fraudulent.
Thank you. I have a follow-up. I discovered annualcreditreport.com. That's the right way to do it. Can you explain the cautions about using the other free credit report services that there are, like freecreditreport.com? Or
it's just kind of like any other fraudy website, right? If you go in, someone will try to charge you for something that's free. That's a big thing, and they'll run it for you. Like Experian will give you your credit report, but they'll try to charge you. Sometimes they'll try to charge you to look at it. So the important thing to keep in mind is that this is a free service. There's no one that should really be paying for this. And it's just like any other, like I mentioned, the ticketing websites. They're just trying to get you to enter your information, and especially to go in and enter your date of birth, your social security number, your current address, and you enter them into a website that's not legit, and now somebody just has that information. So that would be the biggest thing to caution against. And it's, these things get complicated because if you Google free credit report, you might get that government website, but you're going to get a bunch of other stuff too. That is probably not legit, because it's just, all about those ads. So it's not a great, world to live in, this digital landscape that we're dealing with, but there's just certain things you can do to protect yourself. And that's really the bottom line.
You mentioned most of these are seniors that I'm thinking of. So even going to a library is not necessarily an option, even if they were physically, had the mobility. So what state agencies are you referring? I realize you're national, but what would I look for to identify which one in our state they should contact?
Most states have some sort of consumer protection bureau, and they usually have a specific outreach for seniors.
Okay.
That would probably be the way to go. They might do things like that already, but if they don't, you can kind of request that they do that. We're actually working with state of New Mexico, their Attorney General's office, to kind of educate all of their agents at the AG's level, but then also they're kind of sponsoring this training and this outreach to consumer protection and consumer agencies in their state. So it's kind of a holistic view of coordinating all of those different things. So we're trying to almost replicate that in other states as well, so that you're not having to figure that out on your own. The outreach is already taking place from those bureaus to the people that need it the most.
Okay. And last question, and I realize it's kind of broad, but after they reach the ITRC hotline, I realize there's a lot that could be what exactly where are they referred to? Are they kind of just given a summary of the situation and sent to different websites and other phone numbers, or do people that operate your 1-800 number refer them to legal recourse if they need that?
They'll do whatever is needed, really. As far as, everyone answering the call center has been trained in trauma-informed victim services. So you're not going to get a robot. You're not going to get somebody, that's just answering the phone. You're going to get somebody who really fully understands all of the things that are the whole landscape of identity fraud. So they will be able to, give you resources in specific geographic locations for very specific things. They can kind of set you up on that with that kind of information. We're staffed by people who are very well educated in the entire thing and know where to look, and they get these calls constantly, so they have that experience of what they're seeing out there and what they can refer people to.
Okay. And I apologize, since I had a call and I stepped in late. So were there resources in this? Is this PowerPoint going to be shared? And are there resources on your website that I can use to identify things in our geographic area for clients that might call?
Yes, the slides will be shared. It's things that are specific to Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Okay. That I'm not sure about, honestly. Let me look into that and see if we have any localized type of resources, and I will send that to Caroline along with the slides, so that if there's a direct link to that, then you'll have it. Welcome.
I have a question. So I work on general intake, and I'm also a bankruptcy attorney. So this is very relevant, but it's also relevant because I'm a victim of identity theft myself. I noticed last week that Google had put out this big thing about how you could request that they take down personal information of you.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's worth it, or if it's kind of like whoever wants it is going to find another way. And it didn't look like the quickest and easiest process to do this. So I didn't know if that was worth it for me or to counsel our clients to do this.
Right. I actually have that link open on my website to look at after I have it saved, so I can kind of really get into it, because we had the same question the other day about removing your information from search engine results. I think they're trying to get ahead of some of the consumer protection laws that have come out in Europe, and that Europe has the what is it, GDPR, I think is the acronym for their data protection regulations that are in Europe. California has something similar in place. I think that's CCPA, I want to say. These things are just kind of circling around my brain. But that is a big part of it, is the right to anonymity, essentially, the right to not have your data out there if you don't want it out there. So I think Google's trying to start to get ahead of that a little bit if they can. And I think we'll start to see a lot more options when it comes to removing your data. I've done that before, where you have to go specifically to the websites. Like if I run my name and I can see my physical address online, what website is that on? There are going to be things like been verified and all these other public records, things like that. Those you have to, I know LexisNexis has a means by which you can by request your information be removed, but they'll only, I think they only still do it in specific circumstances. So it's really, yeah, it's not an easy process, unfortunately. But that's really the only, I would say that the Google way, if they're putting out a way to do it, then there's got to be some legitimacy to it. But it doesn't mean that, you know, it's going to take care of everything and clean everything up. Hopefully we'll get to that point with the laws being put into place, but right now that's just not the reality.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone have any other questions? I think we went a little over, right? Yeah, just a little bit. If you have anything else and you want to email me, I'm going to put my email address in the chat so that you've got it and you can reach out to me directly. But you can, of course, obviously call main or email the main ITRC, but you should have my email if you've got any follow-up questions. All right. I think that's it for today. But thanks to everybody for coming, for attending. I hope this was useful. We are happy to help with whatever you need, do additional trainings, do more regional, localized kind of stuff, whatever you're looking for, please reach out. Don't hesitate to do so. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.